Hello and welcome to Astrology Hotline, the podcast where we answer all your burning birth chart and astrology questions. Joining me today is Bonnie. Hello, Bonnie.
Hello.
And yeah, we're going to answer some questions like usual. But before we dive into that, how are you feeling today, Bonnie? Let's chat for a minute.
Yeah. I've been feeling pretty it's conflicting because I feel kind of like not myself right now. And at the same time, I'm also like really happy because I just came back from vacation and saw a lot of friends at a pole dancing convention and saw my first dance teacher, who lives in the city I went to. So I haven't seen her in years. But personally wise, I just feel like really off. And Saturn has just gone retrograde. I'm a Capricorn rising. I don't know. I
don't feel like myself, says Saturn.
Yeah, I don't know if it's that or the South Node in Scorpio on my sun. But I feel like the Saturn component has added another layer to it.
Yeah. No, we have very mirror-y charts.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like we have everything in like they're opposite or the same sign or the opposite house. But yeah, probably ended up getting hit by the same transits like half the time.
You're my astrology dark twin because we have reverse like sun, moon, and rising.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the Mercury station direct in Taurus is exactly conjunct my natal Mercury.
Oh,
so I was eyeballing that for months before, and I was like, "What's that going to be? What is it?
Yeah,
is it because Mercury, rules my third house, and third house is like communications and podcasts and writing and sort of day-to-day routine stuff, but it also rules my 12th house. So it's like, what's gonna happen? I don't know. Am I gonna lose my mind or something? But
I feel like when Mercury goes direct, there's like this weird period where like Mercury's kind of like drunk and like very slow.
Yeah.
And I'm feeling that right now. But yeah, I am curious about this Mercury retrograde just because of the people I've been communicating with and like what's gonna come back and bite me.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I know. That's like once it gets into Gemini and stuff, it's still in the shadow.
Yeah.
I ended up starting a podcast though. We recorded the first episode totally on accident the day that Mercury stationed.
Oh, that's cool.
So I was like, oh, my Mercury station return is like very third housey. I got the third housey version.
Yeah, I think that's a good sign.
Yeah. But yeah, it was a weird one because Saturn stationed retrograde like the day, or it had been stationed for a good week, but it went retrograde like the day after Mercury stationed direct, and they were like just barely out of a square with each other. Like they were within a degree, but it's like they were applying to each other, and then they stopped just short of the square, and then started to separate.
Yeah, it's like a standoff.
Yeah,
it's like next time.
Yeah, I'll get you next time. Yeah,
giving you a firm warning, and then
it'll be a try next time, I guess. So
yeah. That's nice. I like that.
Well, do we want to just get started with our first question for today?
Yes, let's go.
I feel like you're a good one for this as a Capricorn rising. Our first question comes from James in Nebraska. And he asks, why is Capricorn always considered to be daddy energy when it's a feminine sign? So what do you think about that, Bonnie, as a Capricorn rising?
Yeah, I feel so as like a feminine identifying person and a Capricorn rising, I don't feel very daddy energy. I feel more like people keep giving me stuff to do and I'm tired, but I have to keep doing it. But yeah, I feel like with Capricorn being considered daddy, it kind of goes with like Cancer being considered really motherly. Like the qualities in like Capricorn and Cancer I see and how they like mirror each other is that they're both about like kind of their community and serving, not the same way as Virgo and Pisces, but more like providing. And that like that's what I associate with Capricorn is like providing, and then with Cancer like more nurturing, like those kind of energies, and they're very gendered for sure.
Yeah, well they definitely have been historically, especially, and it's funny because I've been thinking about this a lot since I was invited to do a talk for symposium on gender, and I don't know, now I've been like watching it, like it made me realize like how much I tend to ignore or take for granted the gendering of things, or that like I almost like I've been in like a blissful bubble of just like, oh yeah, that was the way we perceived things back then. But like, obviously I know that like there is always huge gender standards that are still a big problem. But what was I watching? I've been watching Stranger Things, been trying to catch up.
Ooh, yeah.
And I was watching the 3rd season. Sorry, spoiler alert. Shouldn't be too big of a one.
I think I've seen the 3rd one, but it's been a long time. So
yeah,
I may or may not remember.
God, I'm gonna butcher the name. I can never remember names. I hate it. But was it L or 11?
L11 or L.
And the kid that the boyfriend.
Yeah, Mike.
The romance, Mike. I
think it's Mike. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, they're it's at the point in the show where they're spoiler alert again, but they're together and like they're making out all the time in like her room.
Horny teenagers.
Yeah. And her sort of dad, the cop guy, the sheriff, do you know his name?
Yeah. What is his name? No, I don't remember. It was like a weird, cool nickname, but I don't recall exactly.
Such a broken name.
We're so people that are Stranger Things fans right now are probably yelling at us right now.
I know. It's the thing. It's my greatest it's my greatest weakness. No, I have many. But I can just never remember the names, even of people like characters that I like really like or know lots of things about. But anyway, it's the 80s and he's like this like traditional sort of, he's a cop, right? I think my partner and I, Megan, were sort of joking that like, maybe we have to judge him by the standards of the time. He's a cop, he's a dude, it's in the 80s, like he does all right. But
considering he's a cop and he's a
he's got a lot working against him in terms of emotional intelligence. But he really was like starting to lose it with them making out all the time in the room. And he was talking to God, I can't remember the actress's name now.
Is it Mike's mom?
Not Mike's mom, but Winona Ryder.
Yes, Winona
Joyce.
Ryder. Joyce.
All right. Anyway, Jim Hopper, right?
Hopper is what they call it.
Yeah, is like talking to Winona Ryder or Joyce about the about like what to do, how to handle this, like because he's like losing his mind about them, and she gives him like this whole speech to do. It's like about like feelings and like creating a safe space and it's like a lot of stuff that I would like I talk about or how I try to frame things like with my son, and I almost take it for granted that it's such like a stereotypical dude thing to be like, oh, I can't what emotions safe space to express ourselves, what we don't do that, we're men, it's very Capricorn because it's the detriment of the moon. Like it doesn't want to like do the moon shit. Yeah, and I think that's maybe where a lot of the daddy energy comes from, or some element of it, because there's a lot of things about daddy energy, and maybe even would need to define what daddy energy is. I think that means different things to different people.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I feel that because with Capricorn, it is ruled by Saturn, and like it's like totally opposite of Cancer, which is about like being comfortable with your feelings. And Saturn, like we were talking about the signs series, like Capricorn is associated with like the winter season when things are more scarce. So there's like kind of a reason why Capricorn is like less touchy feely, because they're like, oh, we have to survive, we have to get up this mountain, we have to keep going. And so there is this like kind of I think Colin Bedell from Queer Cosmos, he like defines Capricorn as being really good at like emotional regulation, of being like, oh, like shit's hitting the fan right now, I can't like start crying. So there is like some element of that is like helpful, but I think like right now, like the most stereotypical version of masculinity that we see with that is just like exaggerated like tenfold.
Yeah, and I don't know, and I think maybe it speaks to like the sort of cloistering that we can fall into in the world now, like where we don't can sort of get settled in our own sort of cultures and worldviews, where we're like, it's easy for me to forget that that's how like most dads, maybe still, I don't know. I don't know. I have like a couple dads that I know. I don't, a lot of dad friends, but they're all like in my sort of world of, cushy white suburbia, basically. So, liberal kind of biome, and where it's more acceptable to like talk about your feelings and emotions. And
Yeah.
my son's like friends. I was at like a fair for their school earlier this week, and like their friends were like giving hugs, like all these like boys like coming up and like
That's so
hugging each
sweet.
other and stuff. I was like, this is the sweetest thing ever. It's almost like if you don't condition them to not express their emotions, they'll just do it because it's like their inclination.
Yeah, I think kids in general, like they want to express their emotions, whether it's like they're angry or they're sad, and I tend to like follow a lot of like accounts online that talk about like raising children in like a healthy way. And like, even though I don't plan on having kids, I like thinking about like child psychology and things like that. And like the way that like newer parents, like younger parents now are talking to their kids about feelings and like giving a nuance, like, oh, it's okay that you're angry, but we really can't hit each other, but tell me like how you're feeling, those kind of things. Like that's becoming more common for both genders, I think. And yeah, so we're seeing like kids being a little more like having more language to describe their feelings and being like, oh, I miss my friend, I want to hug them. Whereas like years ago, like little boys would be taught like, oh, that's not manly to like hug your friends or anything.
Oh,
so, yeah, things are changing.
When I was like, we're 90s kids. So like, I feel like I was like halfway indoctrinated with that, or like that was the message I got basically. But anyway, back to the topic. Which, I mean, it's relevant, I would say, is that I think that is kind of at the root. Because you think about why do we get mommy daddy energy, maybe, or just daddy energy with Capricorn, but mommy energy from Cancer, is because, think about like that 80s sitcom or that 80s show, or just, I'm thinking about the 80s, but most of like the presentations of moms and dads in most media throughout the time that there has been TV, you get that like the mom is like, comically, it's like the oldest joke ever. It's like the mom's like trying to be sensitive and talk about emotions and stuff, and the dad's like, well, tell him to sit his ass down, and I'll tell him, I'll give him one more, and let me get my belt, like, which is very Capricorn. Capricorn is, and I think, okay, this is it. When I was thinking about the kids hugging each other and stuff, it was like, that's really lovely that, like, yeah, if you don't tell them otherwise, they will just express their emotions naturally. But they grow up in very sheltered environments, and I'm not even using it in a negative way. They're safe in their environment. Yeah. So they feel safe expressing themselves. Capricorn, as like topically, I mean, deals with the not safe environment, or the idea of scarcity, the not having enough. And what do you do when you don't have enough? You preserve what you have, and you stand guard and protect this sort of precious reserve of whatever is left. And that means like not letting people in, not being being standoffish, or being critical and reserving judgment on whether you let somebody in, assuming maybe that you can't trust them, and they have to prove that you can before you let them inside the wall. And and just thinking about it in terms of feminine signs, like, and I think it actually ends up being a really good example of how it doesn't really work very well a lot of the time, is using the feminine masculine for sort of traditional way of looking at signs that we were probably introduced to. I assume you were, most of us were. I think it's like the lexicon is that fire and air signs are masculine, and earth and water signs are feminine. But and it ended up being the subject of the talk that I did for the symposium, Rebecoming the One, which you can sign up for and join. I'll put a link in the show notes. I highly recommend it. Actually, there's like a ton of really amazing speakers. They're going to be there. And it's totally free. But when I was like preparing for this, I was trying to find like what the origin of that was. Like where did that idea come from? Like in like traditional texts, like old stuff. And it's in like Ptolemy, which is one of the older sources. And he basically was saying that that feminine is wet and masculine is dry. It's kind of like his reasoning for it. But then when you look at like temperament models, Earth is dry and cold.
Mm-hmm.
And fire is dry and hot. And water is wet and cold. And air is wet and hot. So if we're just looking at like dryness versus wetness, if dryness is masculine, wouldn't earth and fire be dry or be masculine?
So earth and fire would be dry, so masculine. And then air and water, which are wet, would be feminine. Okay. Interesting.
Yeah. And honestly, when I think about it, like air sign people seem, I don't know, I guess when I'm thinking about it in those terms, like that's the way that I tend to perceive maybe my expectations a little bit of women is like maybe extroverted women tend to be more that like light sort of warmth. Like air signs, sanguine, like the temperament sanguine. While fire is like choleric. So like sanguine's like lively and friendly and exciting. That's what heat does. It makes things rise, makes things buoyant. But dryness like creates separation. So you combine dryness with heat, you get fire, of course. And fire, it's like very decisive. Fire is like this, yes, this, no, burning through things, and like not a lot of emotional intelligence necessarily with just pure fire temperamentally.
Yeah, it's very confrontational. Yeah, it's making me think about how I feel like gender is like one of those things where it's really hard to define for anyone. I feel like it's more easily defined for you as an individual, but like with air, like I have encountered like a lot of air sign people that fit some of the masculine stereotypes, and it's usually in this like I don't like have emotions, I'm rational kind of way. But I've also experienced the more like feminine air sign people that are very social and curious about people's feelings. Like a lot of my best friends are like women that are air signs, and like they're totally different from like men I know that are air signs. Like speaking like how you define yourself as a man or female, a man or woman. And most the men I know that have a lot of like air sign qualities seem like very much like, oh, I don't have any feelings, and like it's just about the data, and like it's really about being rational and like not being biased by emotions or feelings or anything like that. And then with a lot of the women identifying people I know that are air signs, it's more like, oh, I want to know how you're feeling, like what's the news, like tell me what's going on in your life, and being kind of attentive, like especially Libra placements, like being attentive to people's feelings and like kind of seeing the energy of different people in the room and seeing like, oh, that person seems down, let me talk to them. Like they do seem very like emotionally intelligent too.
Oh yeah. Well, it got me thinking about air signs differently because of that wetness, that quality of wetness. And while I try to create like this table of like, okay, which air signs are the most wet and which ones are the most warm, and like Aquarius, I would say is going to be a relatively drier and cooler air, but it has that quality of air still. It's still kind of like on that end. So Aquarius has like emotional intelligence. It may not actually give a shit or may not act on it all the time, or it's almost like more of that casual, dispassionate curiosity of like, ooh, you're feeling this. I see that you feel this. How would you respond?
Yeah, it's a little more detached from like the raw passion of like water sign emotions, but it's still there. Like it's curious about emotions and it feels them, but it kind of like will rationalize them a little bit.
Yeah. But anyway, taking it back to Capricorn, just thinking of those two in terms of, I don't necessarily think of one as being more masculine. If anything, Capricorn seems like more of like the dudely dude, like the dudiest dude ever. It's Mars. It's the exaltation of Mars. It's, Saturn, which Saturn, gender-wise, I'm convinced that it's just like the anti-gender planet. Like it's just
That's how I think of all of the planets now.
I know. Well, I got forced to like think about this a little bit, but
yeah.
I was like,
with Hellenistic astrology, there is like a big emphasis on gender. Yeah, and so I think like right now, I just finished a class called Queering the Planets with Stardance Mystery School, and we kind of talked about like different myths and like how they're associated with the planets, and just like different ways of seeing the planets as like more than just like masculine or feminine. I feel like it just kind of like depends on like the planet in your chart and like how you see it and how you identify with it, but yeah, that's not an easy answer to the question of considering that we're using gender here. It makes me wonder, like, because I know that like gender is like a social construct, like gender is different from sex, like gender is like how we identify with, like the qualities we identify with. But there does seem to be like a spectrum of like some people, they fall into more like, I like these like kind of masculine like clothing, like what is associated with masculine, these movements that are associated as masculine versus like feminine, and there does be some like groups there. So it is like social construct, but I don't think it's like completely useless either. It's more just like, how can we change the way we see masculinity and how can we change the way we see femininity and like make both sides a little healthier, and then also like recognize the spectrum in between and let people kind of play with whatever they want.
Yeah. Well, I think it's maybe worth, like, as part of that is we sort of have to recognize how inconsistent our models for gender have been historically. We have sort of a basis maybe that's consistent-ish, which actually, and this is sort of my argument for why maybe it doesn't feel like it applies as well anymore. This Earth maybe as a feminine sign or a feminine element is because coldness has many layers of meaning. Coldness versus heat has layers outside of this, but one of the components of it is like social status. Cold draws things down. It keeps things still. It brings them down lower, while heat makes things go up. They rise. They go higher in terms of like status. And who did you see out in the world 100 years ago, 200 years ago? Men. They're out doing things. They're out accomplishing in all the positions of power and achieving everything, while women are supposed to stay home, stay cold, stay still, and keep things secure and be afraid all the time. That's like another coldness. It actually, I mean, the positive end of it is it promotes thought before action. It's like Earth is better at thinking before they act, right? Think of any Earth sign.
Doing the risk analysis, looking at your resources, seeing like what can you get away with, what can you be risky about, what you should be safe about. Yeah.
Which you get different versions, I guess, of, I don't know, it's like there's a bunch of different, like that's where I'm like, oh yeah, I see, because often women are more considered and less rash, right?
Yeah.
But like, I know just as many women that don't do that. But I think maybe impulsive. And maybe there's a component to the fact that women are more exposed to risk in general. Like they're more vulnerable a lot of the time to men. Let's just face it. Like they're
men are statistically
dangerous. Men are fucking dangerous.
The reason why women should be worried for their lives is like usually a significant other that's a man. Yeah.
Men are more responsible for most of the crime that happens. They commit more violent crime. As my international relations theory teacher, he asked everybody who we thought the most dangerous people in the world were. People said like different things, like related to geography or culture or whatever. And he was like, wrong. Answer is men aged 17 to 21.
Yeah,
they are the most dangerous people on the planet. If you see a group of them walking down the street, not run away, but well, I mean, and overall, I guess I've always felt like an awareness of that. Like I see a group of dudes. When I was younger, I was like, all right, time to go into the mode where I'm ready for a possible fight or a confrontation, because that's what dudes do. And that could maybe say something about just Capricorn, if you were to say maybe traditionally feminine, like is that it's wary of danger all the time, or
for sure. Yeah. That's what we do. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But that's changed a lot, and too, there's more room for different expressions, I think.
Yeah, I think women are like, also like aware of danger in the same kind of way, but in a different kind of way. It's like, I don't want to be victimized. It's like being victimized as like a quote man versus a woman. They're different, but it's like kind of the same thing of like looking out. But yeah, it's true that it's mostly men that both genders are looking out for danger usually.
Yeah. I feel self-conscious about trying to speak on behalf of women. That's not just my observation maybe, but yeah, I don't know. I guess just thinking about Capricorn maybe and this idea of daddy energy, like what you think of in terms of daddy energy, I think, and like the most positive way, it's feeling protected, feeling like somebody's watching out for you, and somebody is going to, keep the bad away from you, but also be, restrictive in the sense of like creating very hard laws, very hard rules for you to follow.
Yeah. Actually, I maybe as a Capricorn rising, I think that like my perception of Capricorn placements is that they're really good at providing, but they also sometimes they want someone to provide for them. But it's really hard to let their guard down and know who they can trust to not fuck things up. So that's like a constant struggle of like, oh, I want to like relax my shoulders a little bit. Like I think of Capricorn as having like a big weight on their shoulders and being like, oh, I want to like unload this and have someone who's also consistent and reliable. But I can't because no one else is. And then they end up just like playing this role of like taking care of other people. But some people do have more like daddy energy and that they're more like confident about that. They're more like, oh yeah, I can do that. That's fine.
Well, just do what needs to be done because it's what needs to be done. And like, you're not going to know how I feel about it because the assumption is that I don't have any feelings about it. They might have a ton of them. Actually, my dad, that's what I wonder, like other people's dads. I don't know. My dad had like a pile up in Capricorn. Was it Venus, the moon, Jupiter, Saturn? I feel like there's another planet, but a lot of planets in Capricorn. And he was a very Capricorn dude. Just very like, you don't know how I'm feeling about things. I'm just going to do stuff and, very dry and cold in that sense. I don't know. Daddy energy definitely comes to mind for me with Capricorn, but I don't think, I don't know if I think of it as a feminine sign or if like the distinction maybe is very useful. I think daddy energy for Capricorn is more useful than it being a feminine sign.
Yeah. So I just like don't really use masculine and feminine that much for the signs anymore. Like it's in the back of my mind, but I usually switch it out to inward versus outward or what's the word? There's also diurnal and nocturnal, like the earth and water signs are nocturnal. The fire and air signs are diurnal. But I think of it more as like more introverted or versus extroverted. Not to say that if you have a ton of fire and air, that means you have to be an extrovert, but more just like wanting to push your energy out versus like keep it within kind of. So that's like what I tend to use. And there can be like some people that identify as men who are very like more internal and more introspective. And then people that identify as women that are more extroverted. And that kind of works for me. It's like, there could be like someone who identifies as a man and like has like that daddy energy and a lot of Capricorn, even though it's like a feminine sign, like they're still masculine, but they do it in like a more introspective, quiet kind of like I'm in control, but I'm not going to flaunt it way versus like maybe a Leo man or something.
Yeah.
So it's like still like they can define their gender however they want, but it might be flavored by those signs. I also have a lot of thoughts about this with water sign men because just like going back to the way gender norms have changed for like us versus our parents, etc. Like I was raised by like a dad who had a lot of water, and I have a lot of water too. And like I can see how it came out in like very like destructive ways because there wasn't a healthy outlet for all the feelings, but he was still just as like emotional as like any woman that has a lot of water. But it's just like the way that energy, the water's going to flow out no matter what.
Yeah.
But it's like, how do you let it flow out? Do you let it like just like build up and explode, or do you like let it trickle out like in a healthy kind of sustainable way? So I feel like I see more like younger men identifying people who are like still masculine, but they are more in touch with their feelings in a healthier way, and they're less destructive with them.
Yeah, I would say as a someone who's born male and still identifies as male, but also like I'm a Cancer rising, and
let's bring it to Cancer.
Yeah, I have the moon in like a water sign, and I would say that I definitely had the experience growing up of like feeling like I had this expectation, like having lots of emotions and stuff, but feeling like they weren't accepted, was not acceptable to be super emotional. So I had to sort of put on a shell or something very, Cancery, but also having the moon in Scorpio too, armed and armored.
Spiky. Spiky moon.
Yeah, but trying to be, I don't know. It's a whole tangent, but the point being is that I had like a group of friends that, were probably very similar in the sense that like softy, sensitive-y type dudes, but trying to sort of not be too much. How can I be as sensitive as I am and still be acceptable socially as a dude? And I found even just like becoming an adult that there's like a level of vindication maybe, and that it's become more acceptable.
Yeah,
for men to be
relax a little.
Not even acceptable, but the expectation for men, I think, has gone up. It's like, you don't get to get away with being a dumbass and like being emotionally oblivious to stuff anymore. Like we're holding you to a reasonable standard on that.
It's like, I think a lot of like women identifying people and like queer people, especially queer people, have like helped show us this of like, there's like healthier ways to be masculine or feminine. And like, you can kind of define your gender your own way, but like, regardless of whether it's masculine or feminine, there's a much healthier way to do it. Like I see that with like some feminine qualities that like I was raised in the South, and I can see a lot of the ways that I was conditioned to be feminine in the South that there were very unhealthy versions of femininity, and like not ones that I like that I want to keep, like being passive aggressive instead of direct with communication, things like that, like letting things build up, resentment building up and things like that. Like those are things I want to work on myself and redefine of like what femininity means. And that, and I guess that's like another way that like I'm thinking about how like, even though like usually it's like men who are like kind of told to be closed off from their feelings, or at least like in the past, that was like more how it was taught. In a certain way, like women have been told to be closed off about their feelings too. Like they can't be completely honest about how they feel. They have to do emotional labor, as in like they're like, oh, like my husband, I'm the only person he can talk about his feelings with, because he can't talk about his feelings with anyone else. Like that's a big trope in the past, and like even still now. So like a lot of like the way women have been conditioned to be emotional is like for other people, like, oh, I need to take care. And this is where we get to Cancer, like having to take care of everyone, and not being able to like fully be in touch with your own emotions, your own like needs, and be honest about them. So
that's a really good point, actually. It's because it's not just men that have to do this or women that have to do this. Like everybody's sort of oppressed by a lot of the gender standards, the genderizing of ways of expressing yourself. I think, and there's like a trap that I want to be careful not to fall into, and I try to look to other people to sort of measure their response. I don't know. I think it's something that we're collectively maybe figuring out, and I don't claim to have like all the answers to it, obviously. And I'm okay with that. I'm like, I don't know. Like maybe that's why we aren't, why we're talking about this instead of just answering the question. But
I know we're just like going around circles. Instead of giving you a clear answer, we're just going to give you some things to think about.
We've probably answered it, but I think that's part of the bargain when you submit a question to Astrology Hotline is we'll answer your question, but we're going to talk about what interests us as well. So
Yes, the answer is daddy is a state of mind.
Yeah. It's like Capricorn's a thing, but is that specifically, maybe the idea of what daddy means is something that changes, evolves, and is maybe not explicitly relegated to men or males or masculine figures. I think moms have to have daddy energy a lot too. Whatever that means. Women have to play that role. I think in reality, most of the time, both parents, if you're fortunate enough to have both parents involved, are playing those roles. Like my son's mom and I, we co-parent, and actually, I remember when my son was a baby. We would get like this joke, like people would call me Mr. Mom a lot, like as a joke, and I'd be like, yeah, I don't know. It's like whatever, like, because I thought it was dumb because I thought like, why? I don't know. Why is loving your kid, caring about them and responding to like their feelings and responding to their pain and comforting them? Why is that mom? Why is that only relegated to moms? I want to be able to do that too. Maybe it's because of my Cancer rising, but I want to be able to share in that as well to the degree that I can, without overstepping. There can be a sense of like jurisdiction maybe with parents. Like, this is what's expected of me. And like, if I don't play this role, then people are going to judge me. And maybe that's why those standards maybe still exist, or why we still struggle with them, is because we have different people with different viewpoints on it. And we're all worried about other people judging us.
That's true. I think we're still trying to navigate like, what is my sense of like gender, sexuality, whatever it is, versus like what other people expect of me. And it's really hard to untangle those two.
Yeah.
Which are like coming out and things like that is a big deal for people. Like coming out is like their gender or sexual, because they have to define it for themselves and not let other people define it. Yeah.
As much as I want to like fast forward to where I like the trap maybe that I'm worried about falling into is that like almost like the colorblind mentality. We're trying to be like gender blind, because obviously it's still important to people. It's still important to me, even in ways that like not fully conscious of, probably because I have the privilege of, more or less matching, identifying with the same gender as I was born with.
Yeah. I think gender can be useful in the way that people want to define themselves. But yeah, the difference is now we want more of a less rigid kind of like gender binary, and more of like, instead of like, like a color block of pink and a color block of blue, and they're like perfectly rigid and you can't step within, like more like a paint gradient.
Yeah.
Which like, 'cause I used to do like painting. I love like mixing the colors and making a gradient from one color to the next and seeing how it like bleeds into each other. And that's kind of like how I think we're starting to see it now. It's like, oh, like you can be masculine, but have some of these feminine traits, and you can be more feminine, but have some of these masculine traits. And then also like how we're defining it also changes of like, what is a healthier way to be masculine? What is a healthier way to be feminine?
Yeah. And I guess I can only speak to my own experience of maybe having to what's the word I'm looking for? Wrestle with maybe the ways that I didn't fit into what I felt like my expectations were, gender wise. Was for me, it was like kind of just had to like stop giving a shit or stop explaining things in terms of masculine and feminine to myself, because you can get pigeonholed maybe, or if you're trying to identify with one and then you express in a way that's associated with another one, it's like then you find yourself maybe condemning yourself or internalizing other people's condemnation. And it seems healthier to me to just to be what you are. And I have to kind of credit Tristan for putting this in words. I think it was during one of the Signs episodes, maybe, or was it during the Planets episodes? Can't remember, but he explained it just like, just when we're talking about Capricorn, just describe Capricorn. Like what does Capricorn mean? And you don't necessarily have to use masculine or feminine.
No, you don't. I don't think for any of them you need to.
It's like it just ends up almost not being a super useful construction because it I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's like what we're seeing right now with like studying astrology and like also like, more information about like traditional astrology emerging and us getting like, more ideas of what the ancients were thinking of and like seeing how that fits in with our modern world. Like there's this chance to kind of like redefine some things. And so it's useful for like, if you're reading a book and you see like, earth, feminine, water, feminine, fire and air, masculine, like it's good. It's helpful to like know those terms, but like also know that we're like just changing things as we go along that to like fit our society more. Like astrology is always going to be evolving.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess maybe for more on that, check out the symposium.
And if you are interested in more like queer astrology talks, I'm co-facilitating at Starsdance Mystery School. We're on Patreon, but we teach a lot of classes. We teach them through like Discord where people can like talk about different ideas, and we'll share like things like meditations and journal prompts. And we have a weekly chart reading class where we'll like interpret someone's chart together. But we do, all of our classes are like kind of focused on like queer astrology and like looking at astrology with like a queer lens. So
that sounds awesome.
Helpful for anyone.
Awesome. What are we saying?
Next question.
Second question today comes from Michaela. And Michaela writes, I was told that because I don't have a stellium, that I would have a hard time finding direction in life. Is that true? And my answer to you, Michaela, is no. Is no. I mean, that's my starter answer. And I guess if you don't want to hear...
who told her that?
I don't know. That. And this is something I don't know. It's like you go into forums and stuff and you get so many ideas. And I love it when you're just treating them like ideas. But unfortunately, I feel like people maybe it's like their first encounter with, what a stellium means. And they internalize that and they don't necessarily know. Not to interpret, I don't know, that it doesn't necessarily mean this exact rigid thing. But I mean, in that case, I can understand maybe why somebody would conclude that or make that statement about stelliums. But I would just say that like blanket, no.
Yeah,
it's not what a stellium means.
I think that's absolutely, I agree. That's not what it means. Do you want to like kind of define like what we're talking about stellium, and that way we can give a little background of like why people might think that, and then we can break it down.
Yeah. So, and there's different even definitions of stelliums. And I guess my definition of a stellium is that it's a word that we use to describe having 3 or more planets in a given sign. Some people think you have to have 4 planets for it to be considered a stellium. And some
people differentiate between inner and outer planets, like
inner and outer planets points maybe don't count, or nodes, do they count? Do asteroids count? And I have like in my mind, or what feels to me like a very simple answer is like, who fucking cares? I don't know. Like, I don't know. No offense to anybody. I apologize. But a stellium is just there's no real interpretive difference in terms of what it means, whether it's a stellium or not. What it means depends on what the planets are in the sign, what houses they're ruling, how they're interacting with each other and other places in the chart. It means, the same stuff that anything else means. It's just that everything's, that topic, you can say broadly that topic, that house, that sign are heavily emphasized. Those qualities are heavily emphasized. But it doesn't, if you're trying to make interpretations outside of that, just based on the fact that it's a stellium, that it meets, whatever your definition of stellium is, you're, I don't know, maybe you're missing, I'm going to phrase this in a appropriate way.
I think, I think like with those kind of like answers, like, like it means you have no focus in your life. It's just like, kind of like an easy answer to give someone where it's like, yes, like this means that, like, like for me in my example, like I have Scorpio Venus in retrograde conjunct Pluto, and like the cookie cut answer is you will never find love. Like love is terrible for you, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like much more nuanced like than that. And like they're I think I guess like what the question is like kind of about is like what I guess like the person answering that question saying like, oh, you have no focus in your life. They're thinking of a stellium as like a big focal point in the chart.
Yeah.
Like this is where you look, all these pointy arrows pointing at this, and this is where you need to focus on your life. When like it's an entire chart and there's like so many different points and planets to look at, and the houses, the aspects, all of that matters. And it's all like a web. Like there's no like one focal point that's like, here's the bullseye, like this is where you go. It's all going to be kind of interwoven with each other.
Yeah. I think that's and I think maybe the reverse, like assuming that you don't have planets, if you have many planets and if you have planets spread out across your chart in different signs and lots of different signs, while I have heard some interesting interpretive points used in like Vedic astrology that have like more consistent origins, I guess. Like there's some ideas around, if you have 4 signs occupied versus 5 signs occupied. I think 5 signs was like the ideal in like Vedic, because it spreads things out enough, or you get enough variety, maybe in direction and stuff.
Yeah, I think variety is good. Like having I have a stellium, and I think it's a pain in the ass. So.
Yeah. And I guess that's tends to be my thinking too. It's stelliums is they're maybe they represent a concentration of energy or
a little too much
of life experience in a certain area of life that can be a lot. Yeah, it can be too much attention there. If anything, it could be distracting and taking you off of track in terms of giving everything else in your life proper attention. I would almost say the opposite, where having planets spread out might be better in a sense, and that you're you're spreading your attention out to the other areas of your life, all of which matter, all of which are important.
Yeah, and it's hard to say like, oh, what should be the focus of your life? Like I think people can have multiple focuses. Like there might be a few particular things that they're prioritized more, but like for me personally, having a stellium is kind of distracting. It's like I keep getting off course of like this, and I keep getting pulled in this direction. And like I would like to kind of divide my attention in more areas, but it's kind of hard to. So like having your energy kind of spread out on the chart it seems like it might be kind of nice because you can like you can be a little more balanced. But I guess like the person like asking this question, maybe they're wondering like, oh, where do I look for like what I would be good at, or like what is like a talent I might have that I should develop, or things like that. Which
I wouldn't necessarily look to a stellium to answer specific questions on that. Maybe, but I would look at other factors around that concentration, like
maybe the sun if that's in the stellium. But
and actually it's a good point, because it was like a point in Vedic astrology that got me thinking about it, is that like certain planets don't necessarily like to be around other planets. like the moon loves company. The moon loves to be in the same sign as another planet, at least in the Vedic approach. But like that makes sense even in like Western astrology, is like lonely moons you don't necessarily want to have, but there's like different definitions of them. But actually you have a lonely moon too.
Wait, my moon is it's the only planet in its sign, but it's making aspects.
It is making aspects.
It's not totally lonely, but it is like the only planet in its sign.
And maybe it's useful to define what lonely moon is.
Because I'm thinking of like the lonely moon as it's like a moon not making any aspects to anything. So maybe and
that's what I tend to lean on. Like the Vedic definition is, if the moon is in a sign without another planet and without any other planets in the sign right after it or right before it, that is the Vedic definition of a lonely moon.
Okay.
So you don't have anything in Gemini or Aries, right?
No, I have the North Node in Aries.
Well, that wouldn't count. And
I have Chiron and Gemini, so I guess both of those don't count.
That wouldn't count
with Vedic astrology. Yeah.
Technically my moon's with Pluto. It's great company.
Oh, that's right. Okay, I was trying to think of what you had. Yeah, Pluto. And so Pluto, would that count?
But not for probably the Vedic definition.
Okay. So you have
probably
a moon
more the
too.
Western. Yeah, it's in it. interpretively makes sense. But then even in the Vedic approach, there's mitigations to it where, if it's on an angle with another planet. So if like it's square or opposed by another planet. But then the Western version is more if the planet is making an aspect with another, if the moon is making an aspect with another planet, it's not lonely. But if it's not making any aspects or won't, and this is a whole tangent that it's a slippery slope because there's different versions of this even of where the line is on that. But suffice to say that the moon likes being with other planets, might enjoy being in a stellium, big cozy burrito of planets to be snuggled up with. But the sun, not so much.
Interesting.
The sun will crowd out planets that are really close to it.
I've wondered about that too, with like planets being under the beams of the sun, because in traditional astrology that is like a thing. But since Mercury and Venus do travel pretty closely to the sun, it seems like it's pretty common. So I guess that's a whole other question of like, if the sun doesn't like that, or like the other planets don't like it from the sun, then why is it so common?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends a lot on the sun. I sort of my going interpretation is like the sun is. I used this in the last episode, but like the sun is like a boss that will like talk over you in a meeting. It's in charge, and like it's fine probably with you being there, as long as you're not stealing their authority or stealing the spotlight from them.
Yeah,
which in some cases might happen.
I was kind of thinking of the other planets being more annoyed being near the sun, like, oh, it's so hot.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so loud.
Yeah. And what planets, and like some planets may enjoy the company of other planets more, may enjoy sharing a sign with, like Venus might enjoy sharing the sign with the moon, but maybe not as much with Mars, right?
I was thinking the moon and the Mars probably are not very
moon and Mars probably wouldn't like it. Yeah.
So
I guess maybe the point is that there's so many other things to consider when interpreting planets that are in the same sign and how many of them there are, other than just the number of them, which I get the impulse of like wanting to start there, and you can derive a bit from that, but something as specific as like not having a hard time finding direction in life, or a lot of the different ones I've seen. Like, what are some of the things that you've seen people say about stelliums?
I was actually thinking about how, like, one thing in traditional astrology, I can see why people think that, having a stellium gives you this much focus, is that like, if you're going by like, oh, like, for example, I don't have any planets in my 8th house, but my 8th house is Leo. So it's ruled by the sun. Mm-hmm. My sun is part of my Scorpio stellium in the 11th house. And so when I look at my other, like all the other houses, a lot of my houses like lead back to the 11th house stellium. Mm-hmm. So I can see that as like a principle being like, oh, this is a big focus. Like I do have these areas like 9th house travel, Virgo. It like leads to the 11th house, and I like to travel with friends, but so there's like some kind of link there, but so I can see why people like think that with like the focus of like, because that having that many planets in that house or that area in your chart is going to be pulling these other houses to it.
Yeah, but that's also maybe another important point is like, actually with both of our sort of, I don't know if 3 planets is considered a stellium. I know some people say 4.
Mine's 4 if you count Pluto.
Yeah, which I mean,
but 3 if it's personal, which is some people would count. Yeah, so I count it.
Yeah,
I basically just count like the outer planets as like half, and I'll be like, I consider the personal planets more important, but I also consider outer planets if it's like with like 3 personal planets. Like that's usually what I go by, but I still consider the outer, because if the outer planet is like close to a personal planet, I look at that very closely, especially with my Venus and Pluto. They're enmeshed with each other.
Yeah. But I mean, I guess the defining a stellium and all the things, the energy we put into like debating maybe what defines a stellium or not, really only serves the purpose of like getting stellium cred.
That's true.
But what does stellium cred even mean?
It could just
than, I mean, that was a good point about it being like, it's like a lot of things go through that house and go through that sign.
Yes.
But if like the ruler isn't in that sign, then it almost like might just put more at the disposal of that planet that's ruling the sign.
Yeah.
It tends to be how maybe I think about that too. but it's, I don't know, maybe before you're trying to out Stellium like your buddies. I don't know. I wouldn't assume that it's like the best thing in the world or the worst thing in the world. Like,
No, it's just, yeah, for me, it's just kind of distracting sometimes. But
yeah.
I think I do personally feel a pressure of like looking at my chart and being like, oh, I have so much going on in the 11th house. Like, what is my big thing that is involved with the 11th house? Even though I have like a lot of 11th house things like throughout my life, like there's no like one big thing. And then I do gonna kind of get caught up in thinking like, oh, what is purpose in a chart? That's just like a hard thing to define. Do you mean career purpose? Do you mean like your overall character, like what you're known for? Like there's just like so many points you could look at the chart, and then that gets to the whole thing of like, well, what kind of purpose am I talking about? Like, am I trying to look for my career purpose? Am I trying to look at for like my motive in life? Like, where do I need to look? And then maybe it's like, okay, maybe I should look at the MC. Maybe I should look at the North Node. Maybe I should look at Mars for like things I want. You know, that it just kind of depends on like how we're defining purpose.
Yeah. One. That's a really good point, actually, because I think there is like almost like an impulse to like want to look for one placement or one thing to tell us the answer to this, maybe just one question of like, what's my life purpose? Which,
yeah, going back to pop astrology and the sun sign, you know, being that used to be more of the common thing of like, oh, your sun is who you are, and that's it. That's all you have.
Or you get people like wanting to know, like, okay, I want to know what my future husband is going to look like. What color hair is my future husband going to look like? Where do I look in the chart for that? Which, you know, I could tell you maybe some areas you might look, but I don't know if it's going to tell you that or not. Like, it'll tell you stuff about them, but it may or may not tell you that specific thing. But I also wonder if thing that just occurred to me is like the ability to be able to call yourself a sign. I wonder if that's maybe what drives the stellium hunger. The stellium greed is like, I want to be able to claim the sign as me, as my own.
Yeah, people miss it. They're like, oh, I used to be just the sun sign, and I knew who it was. Now I'm confused. And I think that's another thing of astrology is like now we're making it more like, because people are studying it more. We're finding more information that we didn't have before. We're making it more complicated. And with that, you have to do a lot more digging into how do I define this for myself? Like, who am I? And that's not an easy answer that like some people want from astrology. Some people want like, oh, I want to know who I'm going to marry. I want to know when I'm going to get married. I want to know like what my career will be. I want to know like who I am. And it's like, yeah, like we can use astrology to help like define you a little bit, but you also have to work with your chart and like see like where that is carrying through. Like you can't just rely on an astrologer to tell you this is who you are. You have to also like work with it and see like, does this feel true for me and how does it show up in my life? So it's like, I don't know, it's like a way of storytelling, but you have to be actively doing the storytelling too, not just the astrology.
Absolutely. Well, and you know, do you want to like have the chart write the story for you, or do you want to have a direction with the story? You know, which you know, if you're trying to identify with your chart, right? Which I don't think there's anything wrong with, like, because we end up talking about like, oh, it's, you know, it's very my Mars describes this part of my personality really well, and it does. But like maybe thinking about why it does. It's maybe because none of the chart really is you per se. It's experiences that define you.
Oh, that's so meta. I love it.
And what I mean, and this is the deeper question, is in like traditional astrology would just identify you as basically the ascendant.
Yes.
And that all the other planets are speaking, you know, they're like judges, gods in the cosmic court that are speaking on the topic of the ascendant and what, you know, defining it and speaking on your life, you know, advocating for or against you.
Yeah, I can totally see that, because I feel like with all the different houses and signs and like the planets there, it's like I feel like a Capricorn rising, but then when I'm in a different area of my life, I feel a little different. So like when it comes to like career things, I feel more like a Libra. That's like my MC, but I don't personally identify as a Libra. It's just like that's how I do notice I tend to show up in that way. Yeah, so like when you kind of separate out like that, you can kind of see like the different areas of your life, the different contexts where that energy shows up differently, and you can like look at different points in your life. Like going back to like the question of like purpose, like okay, what kind of purposes am I looking for? Am I looking like where do I want to live one day? Where like who I want to marry? What my career is? Like where would I like look at that part of my chart?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think at the end of the day, we're using metaphors. Like these are all just metaphors for describing something. It's really hard to describe. That's actually like what all myth is like we're telling these stories that are trying to describe the nature of the universe in some way. But they contradict each other and they're, ways of conveying meaning to describe something that's a lot more ineffable and harder to describe. But don't try to get too like committed to one way of looking at it. I mean, you can, but I guess trying to tell other people that like you can't look at it this way because this is the one way to look at it. Is, there are ways that are more effective, but I guess it all comes down to like what's the most useful to you and what's the most helpful. And if it's going to make you feel shitty about yourself that you don't have a stellium, like fuck stelliums.
Yeah.
Fuck
stelliums.
And I will say objective that, from my point of view, that stelliums don't point to specifically in and of themselves good or bad things.
And I agree with that.
Yeah.
We have 2 astrologers that have stelliums saying fuck stelliums.
I don't think mine's considered a stellium. It's only 3 planets.
That's true.
I have 3 in Capricorn, but 2 of them are outer planets.
Yeah, I have 3 personal planets and 1 outer. So depending on your definition, might not count.
I don't feel bad about myself for not having a stellium.
It's like it's just easier to say stellium or not, but it doesn't really matter.
It sounds cool.
Yeah.
All right. Well, guess we can wrap it up for today then. Yeah. How can people find you? What do you got going on, Bonnie?
Sure. I on Instagram and Twitter, I'm Mayday Astrology. So I'm not doing readings yet. I'm still taking time to study, but you can find me with Starsdance Mystery School. We're on Patreon and we have a Discord classroom. I mentioned that before. I also am sharing a Twitch channel with 2 of my best friends. It's called Best Witches Coven. And we, on different nights, like it'll either be me talking astrology or my friends Sky and Snow doing tarot readings. We're talking about rituals. We're all 3 of us witches, but we have different talents that we share. And then sometimes we'll do Fairy Fridays where we all 3 of us get together and like do joint astrology and tarot,
nice.
which is a lot of fun. So you can find us Best Witches Coven on Twitch, and then Starsdance Mystery School is the school that I co-facilitate at. August 5th, we'll have a class called Planets and Aspects. So we'll talk about aspects.
Awesome. Sounds great.
Yeah.
What's the name again?
Starsdance Mystery School.
Starsdance Mystery School.
Yeah. But also just like hit me up on Instagram because I like chatting with people.
Yeah. Yeah, you actually are like one of the best people for just like you are always up for chatting. I always feel guilty because I'm like may or may not be able to chat. Feel bad because I've been like I was enjoying your are you still doing the Twitch?
Tuesday. I'm
Tuesday?
I'm doing Tuesday nights from like 8:30 to 10:30.
So you're doing like the sort of the readings or like little
mini like little mini readings. Lately I've had a lot of people that want to learn astrology and they've just been like, basically I'll just like start talking about whatever tangent I'm studying right now and be like, this is what I think about that. And this is like a thing I see people get wrong that I don't like. And I'm gonna go on my soapbox and to explain this.
Yeah.
And like a lot of people are like, yeah, that's cool. And they'll like be like, where do I learn more? And I'll just like give them resources.
Yeah.
So I've had a lot more people like that lately, but then also like other days I'll have like people that want me to like take a quick look at their chart. So I'll just like do like a quick look because I'm still studying and learning. So it's giving me a lot of practice to look at different people's lives and how they experience their charts.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it's great practice. Practice a great way of learning. It's like actually hearing people's stories, being willing to listen to what they have to say about their lives and not maybe assuming everything based on the chart.
It's been very eye-opening, and also just thinking about like what I'm reading, like how do I explain it to people and like how do I define it to them, because that's like a really good practice.
Yeah, for
me it's just like having my Mercury in retrograde needs a lot of like practice of like talking, communicating, like let me just like word vomit and like I'll basically just be like refining some of my thoughts through that. And also that one downside of Twitch is that people just like type in a chat box, so it is a little bit harder to get like quick feedback. So I'll like it's been an interesting practice of like trying to give people like delineations.
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 Fancy
weird word. Yeah.
It's not a word I really hear much outside.
Yeah, I guess like interpretations, but leaving it kind of open, but not so vague. Like that's the tricky part with like being on Twitch. Like I don't want to make this so vague. It's just like nothing, but also I want to give them some freedom and autonomy. So it's been good. It's been really good practice for that too.
Yeah. Yeah. That's I have a choice. Advertise this. I do have every week. There's one slot available to book a what I call a research reading, where it's basically I get to ask you questions about your chart, and I get to ask you everything that I want to ask you if it's free. And I offer one per week. So if you're interested in that, in being interviewed, and I'll tell you what I think, how I think it's showing up in your chart. You'll get a lot of the benefits of a regular reading. It's almost just for me to like put some of the expectations on a shelf a little bit, and for me to get more of to stay in touch with maybe that approach of like not going in with preconceived notions, because I like it.
Yeah, it's a different approach.
It makes me better.
No, I think that's really cool because like you said, like the idea of having preconceived notions, like as like an astrologer, you do have to kind of like look at their chart ahead of time, have some thoughts and ideas and come with that. But then you also have to like ask them questions about their life too. But it's like with the research readings, you don't even have to have the preconceived notions. Just like, well, what is like Mars and Cancer show up for you like in the fifth house? Like, what does that mean for you?
Yeah. Sometimes I'll even have like a list of just like, all right, do you experience this? Do you experience this? Do you experience this? I won't necessarily do that, but it just depends on whatever in your chart interests me. It's like to reverse the roles a little bit.
Especially if it's like a really interesting or unique placement. It's like, I think that's very Scorpio. It's like collecting all the information, like all the research.
Yeah. And it's fun. And people have gotten a lot out of it too. So, you can do that. You can also book a regular reading with me. And what else do I got to plug? Oh, yeah. Ada Pembroke, who you may remember from the Aspects episode. I don't know if we're going to get the second one out before this episode comes out or not. We have started a new podcast. It's a weekly podcast. It's exactly 60 minutes long every week, called Wandering Stars, where we get to do just get to talk about whatever we're interested in astrology wise, which may be interesting to you if you're interested in just hearing what astrologers have to say about astrology. The only difference is that there's no structure necessarily imposed. It's just natural conversation, which is probably a lot like this episode.
No, I think this has been very similar. Yeah, but I'm going to check out that podcast.
And then, of course, check out Rebecoming the One. Really awesome. But yeah, thanks so much for joining me today, Bonnie.
Yeah, this is fun.
Having you back. And yeah, always welcome on the show. And then thanks everyone for listening. I'll see you next time.
If you have a question that you would like to have answered on Astrology Hotline, send us an email at astrologyhotlinepod@gmail.com.